everybody. Hello, Happy New Year. I guess this is the first live stream event of the year, right, Maggie? Is that correct? I think so.
Yes, it is.
All right. So thank you all for joining us and to the LitheSpeed team that's here as well. My name is Raj. I'm a consultant, agile consultant, technical coach, trainer, and practitioner with LitheSpeed. And super excited to share a story of one of the organizations that I work with and its journey in creating a different kind of a learning experience for its teams. And it's based on these Learning Dojo principles. We'll talk about what that means, and maybe some of you have already heard about this concept. The term dojo itself is not necessarily new, but the principles from that dojo way of learning are being increasingly integrated into modern organizations to develop and new skills within the team. So we'll talk a lot about that, and specifically using this one particular organization that that I'm involved with and its journey towards this Learning Dojo's way of working. So let me just move forward. The agenda for today's session will start with what problems was this organization really trying to solve that led it to move towards this Learning Dojo model. We'll talk about what is a Learning Dojo, what are some of the principles and practices. We'll also compare and contrast traditional standard classroom type learning with the Dojo learning model, because I think when you compare and contrast, I think it's a better way to really understand the underlying Dojo principles. And then once we understand those basic ideas, I'm going to quickly go into how this one organization applied those principles in creating its learning journeys. And I'll share lessons learned and so forth, and we can open it up for Q&A. Okay. So I just want to mention that we are just new in the journey in terms of applying this learning model. So the initial pilots yielded encouraging results, as well as some of the pain points. I'm going to talk about that. I also want to say one other thing is there's no one set way of applying the Dojo learning model. What I'm going to present is one interpretation of how this organization embarked on this journey. Okay. All right. So let's get along for this ride. Start with the problem context itself. What problems were we trying to solve? I can't name the organization, but it's a large Fortune 500 company. It's based here in the Metro DC area, and it operates in the U.S. secondary mortgage market, right? It's a large enterprise, and like most organizations, they've adopted agile ways of working in the early days in little pockets, but since 2017, there was a concerted movement towards moving the entire organization, especially the software delivery teams, and we have over 150 teams, towards agile ways of working, right? So that was really from a process adoption perspective. And last year, the process adoption is, as with most organizations, there's some good practices, good behaviors, maybe some not so great behaviors, but all in all, the organization is moving in the right direction in terms of value delivery and so forth. One of the pain points we started to notice last year was the engineering and the technical excellence parts were sort of lagging behind, right? We were pretty conversant with the process side of things, but not so much on the engineering and testing and automation and those aspects of it. So we started this testing excellence initiative to explore and execute better development and testing practices, specifically around the testing arena. Now, as with any change initiative, right, one area to consider is what's the most effective way to get these skills and techniques down to the teams on the ground. And note that we have a mix of employees and contract workers and such. So that also adds to some unique challenges in terms of how do we really make sure that all team members have equal exposure to these to new ideas, skills, and behaviors, right? So that's really the setting the stage or the context. The other aspect to it is, like most organizations, this organization too has a traditional training program, one-off trainings that are scheduled, and people can go off and get training and so forth. But what we really wanted to do with this testing excellence initiative is two things, right? We wanted to ensure that it's not just select individuals, but the entire product team be able to learn and apply the skills together with a shared context. That was one part of it. And the other one is equally important is, how do we ensure that the skills being learned actually are retained and applied in the context of their daily work, right? So these were the twin goals that we are after as an organization with regards to this testing excellence initiative. Now, traditional standard classroom type trainings, I mean, the organization still offers that, and they're fine in exposing skills and practices and serve some purpose for sure. But the issue is, given that these were our two big outcomes, that format didn't really lend itself to satisfying these two objectives, right? And as with, and maybe some of you, and we'll have a quick, I want your perspective on this. Some of the challenges that with the traditional format is it has varied audience. So really there's no shared context in terms of the problems that we're trying to solve. Activities in a standard classroom, 1, 2, 3-day format, the activities can't necessarily be directly related to one's work. And there's not really enough time for repetition and practice and things like that. There's some of the challenges with traditional classroom training. So I want to hear from you before we move further. So I wanted to just set the context as to where the organization was, what the goals were, and what problems we were trying to solve in terms of that skill dissemination. But I want to hear from you and your thoughts. And Maggie, if you can help me very quickly with this survey. I'm sure most of you are familiar with classroom standard training programs as individuals or within your organizations. What are some challenges that you see with our traditional classroom type training programs? Maggie, can you sort of read out some of the salient ones?
Absolutely. Not enough hands-on learning. People learn best by doing, and by doing work on real business problems, not theoretical or hypothetical. So the issue I've seen is how to make the learning learned and ready for the real world.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Generally lecture style, less hands-on, less ability to learn from peers through dialogue or case studies, lack of engagement and participation, use or lose, often new techniques are not used, so they are lost. No long-term retention, Zoom fatigue, large batch delivery, getting people's time and attention, multitasking.
Yeah. No, the great responses. So again, I think love the answers, and this is no different than what this particular organization and what we've faced. So it looks like we have a shared perspective in terms of the typical challenges with the traditional standard format. So the question is, what do we do about it, right? So I'm going to continue here. Let me close the result, the poll. So this basically brings us to the Learning Dojo. What is a Learning Dojo and why should we care? So the term dojo is a Japanese term. I'm sure most of you have heard it. It's essentially a training school or an education hall. Organizations are increasingly applying some of these dojo principles to the development and implementation of new skills. And I think the first organization, if I'm not mistaken, was Target in 2015. And the then CIO, Mike McNamara, said that, he had an initiative to move the product teams at Target to adopt mindsets of lean, agile, product, and DevOps. And essentially, he formalized the Learning Dojo model as it applies to software delivery teams and such, right? And since then, I think Walmart has Dojo style of learning, and there are other large organizations that have adopted this way of upscaling teams. It's not so much that they dropped the standard way, but essentially augmenting it with this more immersive, holistic, in the context of the team's work way of working. So I think I've highlighted the key words to me when you talk about a learning dojo. It's an immersive learning experience where the entire team learns new skills, right? So right off the bat, and we'll explore how a learning dojo accomplishes this. Like I said, it's a structured format. It's not a one-size-fits-all format, but I think the essential guardrails are there for us to craft the learning experience inspired by this by the dojo principles. So what some of the essential ideas before I get into how the specific case study is, I think we can learn a lot about the differences when you compare and contrast the traditional experience with the Learning Dojo. The first thing is, and it's related to some of the things that you've mentioned in the poll, in traditional learning environments, because of the time constraints and because you have a diverse audience with different backgrounds and perspectives, the practices are taught with generic activities that are related to the theoretical idea, but not related to the team's daily work. Whereas in the dojo, yes, there is some sort of warm-up activities in generic terms to illustrate a concept or a practice, but very quickly, the main learning is done in the context of the team's real work and the real constraints and the limitations of their particular organizations and work environments, right? Big difference there. Second one is usually traditional, at least in the context of my organization, yes, training is available only for employees and they can take it whenever they have some free time. So essentially, there's no shared context. It's really very individual focused. It's a single person learning some skills. In the dojo, it's very much a team-focused approach where all members sort of working towards a product or service are really working in the context of their real work and working together and sharing experience and so forth, right? So there's that difference. Traditional learning models, there just isn't time for repetition or practice and iterations, whereas an essential aspect of a learning dojo is these are, there's opportunities for iteration, repeated practice, which generally leads to higher retention of those theoretical concepts. Last but not least, in traditional models, there's limited time for assessment, adaptations, feedback, whereas in the Learning Dojo, reflection and continuously adapting, improving is an essential facet of the Learning Dojo model, right? So right off the bat, you can start to see that these are both about upskilling individuals and teams, but their approach and their underlying principles are fundamentally different, right? So given this understanding, let's take a look at how this particular organization created a new learning model integrating these dojo principles. So we'll do a little bit of a deep dive. Again, I want to be very clear that this is not the only way to do it, but what I'm going to demonstrate is this organization's approach to doing to implementing this learning model while sort of embracing all of those core learning dojo principles. Okay. All right. So before we even get into the structure and the format of the dojo, we need to ask ourselves, right? What exactly are what problem are we trying to solve? And in our case, as I mentioned, it was raising the technical excellence. Very clear, right? So given that particular organizational goal, so first order of business when establishing a dojo is defining the practices that will be taught within the dojo and also just as importantly, what practices will not be covered. And when doing this, it really helps, at least it helped us to sort of draw out the entire development of value stream. And note that my example here is very specific to the development arena. You can apply the dojo principles to other aspects, product discovery, and so forth. I just want to mention that I'm talking about software and testing here because that was our organizational context in terms of what we were trying to raise the skills of the individuals around. Okay, so we charted out the development part of the value stream, and then you see those big boxes, and we start to list out all of the practices, enabling practices, and also we needed to be cognizant is which ones have the highest impact right away. And also which ones we don't necessarily have the skills within our facilitators and our coaches to upskill the teams, right? So it's a delicate balance saying, yeah, which ones can we do, which ones we can do, and what part of the development value stream are we really going after, right? Generally, it's recommended that you go as broad as possible. And the reason for that is oftentimes different practices within each of those segments that you see within this development value stream. There's an interrelationship between different skills. As an example, BDD Gherkin it has an impact on how you might do test-driven development, for example, right? So there's an interplay typically across practices. So it's good to lay out the entire segments and then pick and choose practices that you will go after in terms of teaching within your dojo, right? So that's the first thing. Once you've done that, it's designing the structure of your dojo experience, if you will. So in our case, so this shows the 4 stages, and these 4 stages are pretty typical of any organization sort of embarking on creating a dojo-based learning experience. So I would say you can essentially, if you're thinking about doing this, these 4 stages are typically prevalent in every learning model, dojo-inspired learning model, right? And we'll talk about each of these steps in greater detail, but this, I want to just give you a high-level visual. The characteristics of a dojo is what's listed below. While we've picked the various topics, it's not a one-size-fits-all curriculum, right? This is essentially a palette of offerings that you have coaches and facilitators who are skilled at delivering to the teams. But depending on an individual team's context and the skills resident within the team, the curriculum can change, right? So it's not a standard curriculum. You come 2 days, you get the same thing, everybody goes off. That's not how it works, right? So that's number one. As I mentioned, the real learning happens in those iterative learning loops that you see in step 3. Now, traditional kind of learning do happen, but in a micro learning structure where there is some of the facilitator or the coach sort of explaining, illustrating the concept, explaining it, and also maybe doing some generic activities. But very quickly, the main learning, like I said, happens in the context of the team's real work. And there's always time in those sort of learning loops reserved for reflection, conversation, new insights that come, shared on this, all of that happens. Right? So this is very much a structured approach. But again, this particular organization's a way of how the dojo experience really flows. So I'm going to talk about the different stages very quickly, and then I'll talk about the lessons we learned, and then we can open it up for questions, okay? All right, the number one thing is, okay, now you created this dojo, you have this set of practices, now you need to get the word out, right? So the intake is all about doing a little bit of show and tell, right? I can assure you, this is one of the lessons learned for us is just because you built this shiny thing, the teams are not going to come knocking on the door and say, hey, let me, experience the dojo and so forth. That is really not what's going to happen. You have to make a concerted effort at actually selling your product. In that regard, what our experience was in this organization is the dojo is a product unto itself, and you have to essentially sell what it's offering. So the first part of the intake is really taking a roadshow, go to the various business units, which is what we did. Create awareness, talk about what problems it's trying to solve, what skills the dojo experience offers, and then let the leaders try to sort of identify teams ready for this immersive learning experience, right? Especially as you get started, because it's not going to happen where teams are going to be clamoring to get into the dojo. So once you do that sort of overview, the next step is once some teams have been shortlisted by the various business units and such, the next part of the intake is a consult. Again, this is just a 1 hour or 2 hour, maybe not even 2 hours, where you're orienting those identified teams on what it means. You're explaining the dojo flow, what skills, what expectations, and most importantly, the time commitment needed, right? I think this is a big part. This is not a 1-2 day kind of an experience, right? There's an investment that the team needs to make, and so they need to think about when's the right time to enter the dojo, right? And it's also an opportunity for the folks running the dojo, the coaches and the facilitators to learn about the team and what their high-level learning goals are, right? So this is again part of the intake, right? Broad socialization, identify some teams, and essentially consult with the teams to explain what the commitment is, and if they're still ready for it, right? And if the time is now. So once, and we've been fortunate enough to have at least 4 to 5 teams. Like I said, this is something that we just started doing in the middle of last year. 4 to 5 teams that were interested, and that we sort of narrowed down to a few because we were piloting this model. So once the intake happens, we've identified the teams. It's about team chartering. This is where you're really creating alignment with the team's learning objectives. And the chartering, it really consists of 4 things. First and foremost, what is it that they want to learn, right? We know what we're offering. This is all about raising technical excellence, but we want to learn a little bit about what the team is working on, what their technology stack is, what are they delivering, why, who are they delivering for, and really what skills they wish to learn while delivering this capability, right? And remember, because we're doing it in the context of their real work and real tools and real constraints. So I'm just showing a sampling of things that they wanted to get better at, BDD, TDD, and so on and so forth. So that's the first part. Now, the second part of it is truly understand, and using a tool such as a skills matrix. That's something we use. You could use a skills survey, whatever, doesn't matter. The idea is for us to have an appreciation of what skills the team already possesses in relation to the learnings that they wish to have, right? Because I'm sure there's some members who know probably something about test-driven development and some who are completely new to it. But the skills matrix essentially gives us a one-page view of the team's collective skills and their maturity. And it also helps us balance against how, what the desires are and the expectations in terms of the outcome from this dojo experience, right? That's the second part. So first is aligning on the learning goals, level setting on the skills that they have. And the third part is, this is important, right? And maybe traditional learning environments also do that, but they can't really, these are not meaningful measures. In the dojo, we want to be sure right off the bat, as we are embarking on the journey, we sit with the team members and define improvement measures against those learning goals that they have. So in this case, I'm just showing you a real world example, is they just wanted to improve their unit test coverage and their functional test approach, right, which was mostly manual, and they wanted to change the ratio of manual to automated functional tests, right? So we essentially work with the teams, look at the goals, and identify meaningful improvement measures so we can assess the effectiveness of the learning effort, right? That's really what this is. And last but not least, the final thing that you do as part of this chartering, which is creating this alignment, is create some working agreements. What time are we going to meet, right? We are committed to 50% for the next 6 to 8 weeks. When are we meeting? What are some of our norms? Things like that. Just basic working agreements of working in the dojo. That's what that is. And that's it. So that really concludes the chartering session. Usually takes 2 to 3 hours. And at this point, we are ready to really bring the teams into that immersive, holistic, experiential learning experience, right? So, and if you look at the target model, where target when it first did this, it was 6-week experience. It was all day for 6 weeks. So what we essentially did is we couldn't really take the teams away fully for 6 weeks, and we had to meet them where they were. So we said, we're going to extend this a little bit. It's going to be 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the team's learning outcomes. And it's going to be 50% of the team's capacity is going to be allocated to this immersive learning, right? So note that your speed will decrease. There's no doubt about it, because they are learning new skills, right? And there's going to be a little bit of that ramp up time. And that's why it's super important to get that commitment from the team, make sure that there are no other distractions, releases, and fires that they, at least known ones, before you embark on this sort of learning loop, right? So, and what typically happens in this learning loop, and again, like I said, it's a loop, it happens as a structure. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the dojo is staffed with skilled facilitators and coaches, right? Ensuring that the session stays focused, help navigate the challenges, and primarily encourage participation. As somebody mentioned in that poll, it's not about how wonderful and how knowledgeable your facilitator is and pontificating about all the wonderful things he or she knows. It's about making sure that the teams can actually learn. So there's a lot of encouraging participation and active learning and listening, right? So a skilled facilitator that's also a subject matter expert is needed for it to be a successful dojo experience. Now, the structured format that I mentioned, right? Each session has defined goals and phases, right? Including warm-up activities, a main learning activity, and a reflection phase. So you really want that, right? And that's part of your daily rhythm in this learning loop. And as we talked about it, it's hands-on learning. Activities could include coding exercises, especially in our case, it was a lot of writing tests, problem solving, simulations, a lot of stuff related directly to the work, right? So that's an essential part of this, the daily rhythm. And iterative practice, like I said, this is also something that's an essential feature of the dojo model. And last but not least, this collaboration, cross-team member collaboration, knowledge sharing, and then opportunity to reflect about the day's activities, any new insights that may have emerged. And oftentimes, these insights could be, oh, wait a minute, we need to pivot on the actual learning content itself and maybe introduce something else. And this happened with us a lot, right? And because the dojo model doesn't have a prescribed standard curriculum, just a palette offerings, it often sort of is conducive to making these adaptations in a real-time basis, which I thought was a great feature of these learning loops. So that's really it. So this is essentially what happens for those 6 to 8 weeks as part of the dojo experience. And once you exit the dojo, there's a couple of things we do. And again, this is not exactly what other organizations, the Walmarts may do, but this is something that we're experimenting with. And again, we are still new to this game, but these are the things we do. So we conduct an exit interview with the team members, ask what went well, what didn't go well, so that we can improve our own product, which is the dojo itself. The other thing we do is because the leaders have made an investment in these teams. So we want to showcase the learning outcomes to these leaders and managers of various sorts. It's a little bit of selling the product too, again, selling the dojo. The other one is additional improvement recommendations. and ongoing follow-up. Just because you exit the dojo doesn't mean you just leave them, right? You want to essentially have some kind of a sort of cadence-based touch points to see how they are doing as they improve their skills and apply new behaviors to their way of working. Now, here's an example, a real example of for one team where, as part of the showcase, we did two things, right? We talked about we need to measure the effectiveness of the dojo experience, right? We set out by saying, hey, we wanted to hit a certain code coverage. And in this particular example, they were hovering at 50. It just so happened they were able to really amplify that to a high degree. They also met their and exceeded their ratio of manual to automated functional tests. And again, the real proof of the success of the dojo would be measuring things in the longer term, right? We measured this over the 6 to 8 weeks, which is still a significant amount of time, but not so bad. We want to see, does this continue year after year, quarter after quarter? And that's something we're going to start to do to go back and measure and see where the teams are. And also making sure that we're making all of this progress visible to them. These are things that we weren't consistently doing, and that's something that we are starting to do a whole lot more, is very data-driven insights to see where we are in the progression of those said learnings, right? The other thing is it's not all quantitative numbers such as that. The other thing that could emerge as an impact of this dojo experience is also new behaviors, right? So as we introduce different practices, this one particular team essentially picked a few activities from different practices and made it their own, and talked about how their daily software development rhythm is going to look like, which I think was kind of cool, right? So they took disparate practices and assembled a model that really still was aligned with the objectives of the organization, but it was still very much their own, right? So that's something that that could emerge from these dojo experiences as well. So I want to move forward very quickly and talk about, let's see, give me a second here. So that's essentially is the basic life cycle of the dojo model, at least in this particular organization. And so what are some of the benefits and the lessons learned? So let me talk about that. And you got to sort of pardon that straggler of a graphic there on the right. So the benefits that we gleaned is there was a focus on going beyond surface level understanding, right? So, and that was one of the things that we were after, right? We wanted teams and participants to really delve deeper into the subject matter, hone their expertise over time. And I think a learning dojo gives them the safe space and time to actually do that. So I thought that one of the benefits was more than skin deep learning of various concepts. The team aspect of it, I cannot emphasize how great that was in terms of, for the team, they felt engaged, empowered, and that cross-team collaboration opportunities was wonderful. Now, needless to say, because you're applying these principles and practices on real-world problems, it definitely makes it all that more engaging for they don't think of it as something that it's too theoretical or too simplistic. And because of the repetition and because of the learning loops that are fast-paced and on an ongoing basis, definitely higher retention. And the last but not least, that adaptive learning piece that I mentioned earlier on, because it's not a standard curriculum and different teams are at different levels of maturity, and they may say, this is what we want to learn, but as we get into it, we realize, oh, we need to touch something else. And the flexibility of the curriculum is appreciated by teams, a whole lot of things. So these are some of the core benefits. Some of the lessons learned, again, we've only done this for 6 to 8 months. We've run about six teams through the dojos. We're just piloting this, and I'm sure there'll be other lessons learned as well. But right now, the few lessons that we've learned is long-term commitment by the team and organizational backing is required because you are asking for some amount of time of the teams. That's super important. Ensuring that the team is available with limited distractions is also key, because I know in a couple of these the teams, they said they had the time, but once they come in, they say, "Oh, I can't do this, I can't do that." That was very distracting. So I think that's important. If now's not the right time, then no problem. Let's do it 6 months from now, right? And last but not least, we ought to treat the dojo as a product in its own right. I have a typo there, and essentially give it all the love, care, and feeding as you would any other product, right? So. And I think therein lies the success of launching a learning initiative such as this. In summary, just show one page that, a dojo is all about learning by doing. That's really what it is. And here's the model that we followed. And you can think of it as a one-page sort of tear sheet, cheat sheet. All of the things I've talked about in terms of what's done in these various stages is depicted there, along with the time commitments. Note that the learning loops itself, we wanted time-bound, but what the time period is up to you as an organization. For us, what worked and what was amenable was really 6 to 8 weeks at about 50% capacity. Right, so and we worked within that constraint. I know George, who's on this call, he's one of my fellow coaches at this organization. Unfortunately, for some of his teams, he could not get that kind of a commitment, and that then the results were slightly different than what I'm sharing here, right? So anyway, so that's really it in a nutshell.